Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Indie Author Blueprint. I'm Michelle Rayburn, and today we're going to be talking about book cover branding for a series. If you've ever struggled to make your series visually cohesive while keeping each book unique, then this episode is for you. I'll share some tips on planning out a cover series and compare it to something we see every day, an architect designing homes on a cul-de-sac. So let's get started. We're going to start with talking about why branding matters for a series. But before we get too far, I do want to tell you that on Substack, I give some visual examples when I'm talking about these cover series. There are more posts if you look for Indie Author Blueprint on Substack. And there is also some bonus content just for paid subscribers. So if you're listening to the podcast and you want to go a little deeper with this, you will see some specific things on there that are just for paid subscribers. It's only $8 a month, so it's really a cheap way for you to get some coaching and not having to pay the $60 to $100 an hour that my clients pay for coaching. So this is a little special thing for you if you are trying to go deeper with your plans as an indie author. Now, we're going to talk about why branding matters. When you're building a series, your covers are your first impression. They communicate the genre, the tone, and even the quality of your book, which is what I talked about in a previous podcast episode. They also do something else. They establish trust with your readers. So think about it. When readers see a cohesive series on the shelf or online, they know that the books are connected. That visual link can reassure them that if they loved one book, they'll probably enjoy the next. And this trust makes them more likely to buy the entire series. Or they will subscribe to you as the author if it is a nonfiction series. It's a little different. So if you're a fiction series, they want to, have book 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way through book 20, whatever you're putting out there. If it's nonfiction, it builds this trust for them to know, if I liked this self-help book, I'm going to like this one. I like this reader's tone. For me, I write Bible studies. So if I liked this Bible study, I will like the author's style for this other Bible study. So when you're working on this, here's the trick. While your covers should look like they belong to one another, they shouldn't look like carbon copies of each other. And so this is where the art of series branding comes in. I've seen some books where I can hardly tell the difference between book 1, 2, or 3. It was maybe sort of a cookie cutter and then just changing out one word in the title, and it's really hard to tell. I even made a mistake using something too similar on a book and a workbook that I made, and the workbook looks too much like the book, and I haven't gone back and fixed it, but that is in my list of things to do and just kind of polishing it up and re-releasing it. It's been around for a while and it's still selling well, and so I've just kind of left it alone, but I really want people to be able to tell the difference between the books. So I want to give a little analogy here. Let's talk about what an architect would do. Imagine an architect who's designing for a cul-de-sac of homes. Each house is unique, but this architect has been tasked with making them all look like they belong. So different colors, different layouts or features in the home, but from the curb, there's a sense that they all belong together. So I've seen this where there's a 2-bedroom and a 4-bedroom or a side-by-side, and they're all tucked into a neighborhood, and yet they all look like they belong because there are elements that they share. It might be roofline style or similar materials or a similar design, whether it's modern or rustic or whatever it is. The architect doesn't start over with a whole new design for each one. There's kind of a template that's used and applied to the different layouts for each home. So this is what you want for your book series. You want each cover to stand out as its own story, yet when placed side by side, they should feel like a part of a larger whole. And if you hop over to Substack after this, you'll see those photos of examples I have with some clients who, when you put their books side by side, they do look like they're part of a larger whole. So what if you aren't doing a series? Well, you can have vastly different book covers for your books and even have just one font that you use for everything you do. Or maybe it's just how you do your author name. Maybe that's the same on every single book you do, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. You just have this font in this way that you represent your name. The point is to be intentional with your goals and know what you need to do to achieve them rather than flying by the seat of your pants. So I have pivoted at times. I've made decisions and then wished I had done something different. And my things aren't all as cohesive as I want them to be. But moving forward, I have some series in the works that I'm on book 2 right now of a series that definitely looks like they belong. In fact, the 4 covers make a piece of art when they're all done, if they're laid in a quad pattern on a tabletop, like a puzzle. So that's kind of fun. So that's a plan I had to do before I even wrote the 3rd and 4th book. I've only written book 1 and 2. So the architect of a home makes a blueprint if they're designing a neighborhood to make that neighborhood happen. And as an indie author, you or your cover designer need to do the same thing. So that blueprint includes some fonts, colors, images, style, and layout. So let's break those down a little bit. First, fonts. Typography says a lot about your book. So we've talked about this before, but just a little review that the fonts can also indicate the genre. So a bold sans serif font might be action or thriller, while an elegant serif font might be historical fiction or romance. So for a series, it's important to use the same typeface or at least complementary ones for the title and the author name, because this creates instant recognition. And I'll have an example of that in the photos that I have. You can think about like James Patterson books. The fonts and the placement are consistent on his thrillers, so they're unmistakable. You can tell they're his. Now let's talk about colors. Colors can set the tone for your series. So if you're writing cozy mysteries, that's one thing. If you're writing dark fantasy, that's another. You might see like deep purples and blacks, or there are some where you'll see the face of a character, some you'll see the back of a character, and some it's a shadow. It just depends because that's a genre-specific thing. And so this is where you might be choosing kind of a color palette that's based on a genre, but then you can get creative, and you don't really have to have the exact same colors for every book. You can try variations within a palette, or maybe you have one that emphasizes reds, another emphasizes blue, another green. So that you'll see that a lot in some fiction. It kind of keeps it fresh while maintaining the unity of the series. And in my post on Substack, I'm going to give some examples again of the covers for clients. I have one client that for a very unique reason, her covers look different. She likes to do the art for her covers, and then I photograph them and use them in the book. And so they're very different. The colors and the feel is different, but it's also an expression of her creativity. So I've kept the font the same, and her name is always in the same shape and font. And so the titles and her name are what indicate that they're part of a series. Plus, there's a little subtitle that shows that it's part of a series. So you can get pretty unique when you're doing it yourself. You can break the rules. It just depends on who you're marketing to. Okay, so let's talk about images. This is another key element when you're looking at doing a series. Maybe there's a particular character that's, especially in children's books, you're going to have the same illustration on book 1, 2, if it's part of, think about like, if you give, is it a mouse a cookie? I think that's the one. You will see that they're illustrated the same, the children's books. And so you can tell with the fonts and those illustrations that this is all part of that same children's series. So the photography might be part of it. It might be that there are visual elements. So it might not be photographs, but it might be actually graphic images, like kind of a flat graphic, which is different. Or maybe I've seen some cool things where it looks like it's torn paper and stacked, and it's actually art, that's made to look like it was made out of ripped paper pieces. But then every image in the series has that torn paper look. So I just saw one. I can't remember which cozy author. Let me think. Oh, yeah, it was Louise Penny, The Gray Wolf. Go look it up because you'll see it's something really unique. It doesn't look like her other covers. So I don't know if she's shifting in a new direction, but she does a lot of artistic, creative stuff on her covers. Well, her designer does because she doesn't do her own covers, but just go look at their Gray Wolf and you'll see that it's something very unique for the art. And so if you were doing a series and you had all of your art look like the torn paper, the images were made out of, well, maybe not even torn paper, but just paper art. That's what I'm looking at. Okay, so you get the idea. We'll move on from there. All right, let's talk about layout. Layout is kind of a sneaky one because it's not as flashy as the fonts or colors, but it's just as important. Layout includes where your title and your author name and your other elements appear. So if you happen to go look at Louise Penny, because I just happen to mention her now, you'll see that she has her name in a different location than some people do. Hers is at the top. She's also well known, so people are looking for her name more than her titles. So there's a whole thing for that too. But you'll see when you look at her books that her name is right there at the top. And it's often in the same font, especially in those series that she's been doing. So that's an example of how it appears the same and it's consistent. And you'll see that with well-known authors, the readers aren't wanting to hunt for the title. Like I said, they want that author name because there's a recognition there. So that's why their names are so huge. And there was a time when one of the quote rules of self-publishing was that you didn't copy that and make your name ginormous because people didn't know your name. They're looking for the title. But I've seen a lot more of it now where that isn't really a big deal. People just do it how they want to do it. So you might see a little bit bigger name there. And that's totally up to you because as an indie author, you do get to have the final say. And speaking of final say, let's talk about a few pitfalls to avoid. One big mistake is changing styles mid-series. This can happen. Maybe you switch designers, maybe you're trying to follow a trend, but just know that this can confuse readers and break the visual trust that I talked about. So if you're a well-known person like some of the names I've mentioned, it's not a big deal because they're looking for the name. But if you make a big switch midway, then it's confusing. So I have worked with a few authors where they've asked me to redesign a cover from a first book. And that recently happened with somebody with a fiction series where she was re-releasing. And so I designed a new cover for book 1. We kept the interior the same, but then I edited and designed book 2, but at least the covers are consistent. And then I created a concept for book 3, which she's working on right now. So having that consistency with redesigning the cover allowed them to look a lot more similar. But I mentioned final say, and that is a pitfall sometimes because you do have a final say. It's complicated because you are the boss of the project. And if I'm your designer or someone else is your designer, you're giving the orders to that person, but then they're giving you some feedback and saying, professionally, here's what I recommend because this is the industry standard. But then I do have clients who really want me to follow their directions. I might not agree. I might gently explain to them why the color choice or the font or a third subtitle are not good ideas, but ultimately they have the final say. And so sometimes there are some who really want this extra title thing on there and it's just important to them. And so I squeeze it on. It might look more crowded than I want, or it might not be the colors that I think look good together, but it's what they want. So one pitfall then is if you have something specific you want and your designer advises you to do it differently, when you have the final say, ultimately you have the responsibility then. If down the road somebody says, well, that doesn't look the way I think it should have looked, and then you take it to heart and you say, well, maybe you forget that your designer tried to get you to do it differently. So what we do is we make a design, we stick with it, and we change it out when we need to, but just know that if you've stuck with something because you made a choice, that's the beauty of what you get to do. It can be a pitfall, but it's also the beauty of being able to make those decisions yourself. So as you're giving directions to your cover designer, remember that less is often more. So you want them to be able to keep the design clean and focus on the core elements. And if you give them multiple subtitles and branding, like if you have a tagline that you want on all of your books, in addition to a title and a subtitle and your name, it's going to be hard for them to squeeze that on there. And it's also going to make the book look less professional. And if your title is even super long, sometimes, I made the mistake on my first book of having the title be twice as long as it should have been. And again, that one is still selling, so I haven't messed with it, but I've thought about it because I know that the cover had too much on there. All right, so there will be more in the Substack post, so be sure to get that. So as we think about, what can you do now based on this podcast episode? What are some actionable takeaways for you? Well, first, start with a plan. Work with your designer to create a style guide for your series, and this should include listing the fonts and the colors and the layout rules, and just kind of talking through, even if you're not having them design the whole thing, you're starting with a plan. Now, I have had people who want to do multiple books, and I know that, so I start with the plan and I show them how easily I could turn it into a second book so they can see that how that concept would work. And so you might pay a little bit more to have your designer mock up the first cover because you know the title, but then mock up two that you don't, like put some pretend titles on there just to show how it could become a series. That helps you to visualize. So when you're doing that plan, go ahead and think a little bit farther out. And that's the second takeaway is think long term. Even if you're only publishing one book right now, plan for a series because you might look at it and go, will this work for 3, 5, 10 books? What could I do? Because right now I think I only have one book in me, but next week I might think I have 2 or 3. So just think long term and ask the question even, will I want to do more? Then when you're in the middle of this series, test it out. So if you already have book 1 and maybe book 2, mock it up. Put your covers side by side to see if they look cohesive. I do this when I'm designing for people who are repeat customers of mine, where I will show them what they've requested me to do, and then I will put it side by side with their other books. And I just throw it into Canva really quick with the 3 covers, and so they can see it. And then, that might make them go, oh no, actually that needs to be more blue, or that needs to be more green, or something where it's like, yeah, that will actually feel like it blends more. So having your designer do that mock-up helps you to see it as well. All right, so remember, it's okay to update your covers down the line. You might even decide to redo the series, keep the titles, and just redo all the covers, but just be consistent when you do it. So that will help your buyers, and that's ultimately, we're writing for the readers. So each book should be unique, but tied together with a consistent design language. We've talked about focusing on fonts and colors and images and layout and avoiding some common pitfalls. And then you can create a series that really stands out and draws the readers in. I want to thank you for tuning in to Indie Author Blueprint. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you would share with a fellow indie author. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Just look for Indie Author Blueprint on Substack or the podcast episodes on your favorite listening platform. Until next time, happy writing and designing.